Hello, good morning to all. It's a great pleasure to welcome you for this webinar. The idea of this webinar is to have an open discussion, a prospective discussions, to reflect after the 10th anniversary of the entry into force of the GDPR. The ambition of this webinar is to reflect on what can we expect for the next decade. So we will not be focusing on the short-term changes, or what will happen in the next few months or a few years, but what can we expect as fundamental structural changes in the 10 years to come. And for this, I have the pleasure to welcome an outstanding panel who will present different perspectives. We're still waiting for Karolina Mojzesowicz, who should be able to join us probably in the middle of the webinar. She had some other constraints, but we have with us Paul Jordan, who is Chief Policy Officer of CEDPO, which is the largest European Federation of DPO associations, so bringing together the most important DPO associations in Europe. And he will bring the perspectives of the DPO or data governance officers, data compliance officer, data protection officers, so the different profiles that now are emerging around this initial notion of DPO. We have the great pleasure to welcome Peter Kimpian from the Council of Europe, who will share with us his perspective from a multilateral perspective. What's happening globally? What can we expect as fundamental changes for data protection, not at the level only of Europe, but globally, worldwide? What can we expect for the 10 years to come? What will be the major changes or structural changes? Then we have also our dear colleague, Vasiliki Tsiompanidou, who will share with us some perspectives from the research, but also what can be expected following the latest opinions of EDPB on certification as a mechanism for international data transfer, but also the possibility to certify data processing outside of Europe, and how it may or may not impact structurally the future of data protection in Europe and beyond Europe. And personally, as I will have the pleasure, my name is Sebastian Ziegler, I will have the pleasure to chair and moderate this webinar. We will have a first part where we will give the floor to our different experts to share their visions for, say, 5-8 minutes. And then we will have a panel discussion. And the idea is really to think out of the box, to reflect from a prospective perspective. What can we expect? What should we or shall we anticipate in terms of personal data protection in Europe and beyond Europe for the next decade? So without further ado, allow me to, before giving the floor to Peter, so to remind you about a certain number of practical information. The webinar will be recorded and shared online for those who could not attend the webinar today. You can ask questions through the Q&A feature. So if you have any question, don't hesitate to share your questions and to express them. For those who are speaking, when you are not speaking, for the speakers, when you are not speaking, you can switch off your microphone. And of course, the content which is provided and the statements made by the experts are provided for information purpose, and they are not necessarily representing the official view of the institution, but they share the view in terms of person from a expert perspective, and it's not intended to be an official statement of any of the affiliation of the partners. So they will be really sharing their individual expertise and give some food for thoughts for all the participants to reflect on what are the major changes to be anticipated in the years to come. Without further ado, it's a great pleasure to give the floor to start with, to Peter. So Peter, from your perspective, from the Council of Europe, of course, we have the Convention 108+, which is a major element. What can you tell us about it? And how do you see the evolution from a multilateral perspective? What would be the evolution of the structural changes for the decades to come? What can we expect, and what does it mean if once we have the Convention 108+ entered into force? Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure speaking about Convention 108 Plus. I really believe this piece of legislation can bring important changes and real impact in our future. Moreover, in a 10 years perspective, I believe that it will be fully up and running, and in 10 years time, we were discussing very great achievement based on this convention. I would start with a little bit spending 30 seconds for the past, because Convention 108 is almost a legacy convention. So it's a 1981 convention that has 45 years of history, and many things can be said on this, but one thing is for sure, that it has had a very broad and very direct influence on many other legislation and many other privacy frameworks that have been put in place so far. So I really count on this influence to continue and to grow at the policy level, and for policymakers and countries all around the world to use it as a reference point, if not a model, and why not join it and accede to Convention 108 Plus. We already see a great enthusiasm about accession. There are new countries waiting for accession. So I'm pretty confident that the membership, the parties of the Convention 108 Plus will grow in that time. That's very important, and I'm also will touch upon why it is important. But to really single out some of the areas where I believe that Convention 108 Plus has its strengths and can also deliver in the future are, of course, the objectives that it has been based on since its conception, which is the protection of individuals at an appropriate level, and the free flow of data and facilitation of data transfers from and to and within parties. I also believe that these will be the areas which we will see as a major impacts or major developments based on the convention in our parties and beyond the parties of Convention 108. So namely, data transfers, we believe, will be in a much better shape than it is now, at least for the parties. Enforcement of data subjects' rights and privacy legislation in general, I would believe, will benefit from the entry into force of Convention 108 Plus. And there is also an area which we discuss a little bit less about, but it's equally very important: public security and privacy in the public security domain, and the cooperation that the Council of Europe, based on 108 Plus, can offer in this field. So I would also give you some of the references why I'm very confident and hopeful that these changes can happen. I maybe start by saying that, of course, as you probably know, this convention has 55 parties, but it has a very proactive and revolutionary provision about its entry into force, because after 5 years of the opening for signature of the convention, it only requires 38 parties to ratify Convention 108 Plus, which is an extremely high number, of course, but can allow the convention to start functioning and to be applicable for these 38 parties. We are at 34. 2 weeks ago, the Republic of Moldova deposited the instrument of ratification. So we are really closing up to the end of this 38 countdown, which we, of course, are waiting very much eagerly, and many partners and many colleagues are working on this every day in our member states and here at the Council as well. I have to say that once it happens, as based on this protocol, the provisions of the amended convention shall have effect immediately upon entry into force. That's just something very important to bear in mind, because what is going to happen, and I will not go through all the provisions of the convention, but just to underline something: the rights of data subjects. So there are rights that have been embedded in the Convention 108 Plus that are very strong guarantees for the protection of individuals. As I said earlier, I will not mention them, but I would like maybe to draw your attention that there are some rights that you will not find in other data protection legislation, which are quite strong, I must say, with vis-a-vis of new technical, the new techniques of the processing, data processing. So the additional obligations, how we call it, is are the accountability measures of Convention 108. So data controllers have to be in a measure of demonstrate that they have done everything in a view of the compliance with the provision of conventions. And of course, somebody from the European Union, it might not be very unfamiliar, but I have to stress that will be immediately kick into effect with the legally binding force in the 38 parties already. Another piece of great advancement is the exceptions and restrictions. It mainly concerns public interest area and this area of public security cooperation. So I will not spend too much time with it, but it will has the potential of definitely have a beneficial impact. But what I would like to draw your attention to is the data flows, transported data flows, provision of Convention 108 Plus. As I said, in principle, these provisions will kick in once 108 Plus enters into force, which starts with data should flow freely between parties. So that's number one, but there are, of course, other possible measures for sending data based on Convention 108 Plus to another country, which is not party to Convention 108 Plus. We can, of course, discuss at the second part of our discussions, but I would really think that it can help the overall global landscape to become much easier once the 108 Plus enters into force. I would also spend some, not minutes, but seconds about data protection authorities. Of course, they are having their powers and functions again in a legally binding document once it kicks in, the new modernized version. But I would like to draw your attention to Article 17 about mandatory cooperation about enforcement cases, which has a transborder effect. So that's something that could potentially really change the dynamics of privacy matters as it stands today. The last thing is about the functions of the committee. There is going to be a new conventional committee established, and there is going to have several important roles, but I would like to draw your attention to one, that the committee will have the possibility to develop and approve model of standardized safeguards that are referred to in the Convention 108 Plus. So the committee itself will become an approving authority for standardized contractual clauses, ad hoc contractual clauses, and other potential measures that can facilitate the free flow of data with appropriate level of protection of the individuals. I will stop here, but of course have tons other things to say. So I keep it for the second part of the discussion. Thank you so much.
Sebastian?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Peter. So you mentioned 4 ratifications missing before the Convention 108 plus enters into force, meaning that it can come very soon. If not this year, 2027 would probably be the date, the year. And then meaning that, as you mentioned, it will provide a common normative reference for many countries, not only in Europe, but across the world. So fundamental change. So in terms of homogeneity, uniformity of the regulations. So let me now invite Vasiliki to tell us more about these recent opinions of EDPB and what's happening in terms of international accountability, data transfer. What can we expect for the years to come, for the decades to come? What will change with the GDPR implementation and enforcement, data protection enforcement and implementation?
Thank you very much for giving me the floor, and thank you to everyone that is here. Peter actually did a very interesting introduction about what is coming with Convention 108 plus, and I would like maybe to hold on to his last point about having standards within the context of the convention, and in that sense, certification is a sort of standard, and this is exactly what I would like to focus on, this different angle which exists in the GDPR, but also globally. So I think we can move to my first slide as well. Now, certification was initially one of the most innovative elements that was introduced by the GDPR in the sphere of EU regulation as a whole, not only as a tool to attain and demonstrate compliance, but also as a tool to facilitate data transfers at the same level as in the same way that the codes of conduct are doing it, or standard contractual clauses, or binding corporate rules. As you can also see and ascertain from this little comparison, certification is in fact referenced a lot more than the other tools throughout the GDPR, precisely because the idea was to provide this additional level and this more innovative approach towards compliance. And in this regard, certification is also the only tool that is recognized as demonstrating compliant with data protection by design and by default requirements. Now, with that little overview in mind, I would like to say that it actually back in 2022, the European Data Protection Board approved Europrivacy as a data protection seal, which was the first of its kind. So it took some time to get there to have certification fully, let's say, working under Article 42 as well. And Europrivacy was then approved to serve as a European data protection seal that is applicable to both data controllers and data processors across the EU and across sectors. And now, at its 10th anniversary, I think we can say that the GDPR is finally fully implemented, because we now have all of its articles in place, including certification as a tool for transfers. So going back to the very recent past, back in April, the European Data Protection Board actually published 2 new opinions that are now expanding the scope of Europrivacy outside of Europe. Again, this is the first time that this is possible, and the 2 opinions are actually focusing on 2 different elements, even though the criteria are very close to each other, I would say, for the 2 articles. So with the first opinion is actually focusing a lot more on the expansion of Article 42 across the globe. So that means that every party, every entity that is subject to the GDPR, regardless of its location, regardless of whether it is in the EU or outside of the EU, can utilize now certification in order to demonstrate compliance. While the second opinion is actually enabling certification as a tool for transfers pursuant to Article 46, which is, as I mentioned, the first time that this is ever happening. Now, these 2 opinions, of course, are very, very important, because they are adding this missing element into the framework of the GDPR, and they should be regarded in the framework they are meant to serve, which is the more global approach towards compliance. And it is actually in this framework where I would like maybe to take a moment to present some other developments, because in practice, certification, while it took some time for the European frameworks to be established for it is not something that does not exist outside of Europe. Quite the contrary, there are already certifications that are active outside of Europe pursuant to different frameworks. And this is where interprivacy comes into play. Now, interprivacy is an international certification scheme for data protection compliance that has been endorsed by the former IAF, now called Global ACI, which means it can be utilized across numerous states globally. Now, the idea behind this certification is to have this geographically neutral certification that can help enable compliance and interoperability among jurisdictions. As you can see here, the scope of this recognition is actually quite vast. Now, to serve this main objective, meaning enabling interoperability across various compliance frameworks, it has actually assessed and is encompassing now not only the GDPR, but also Convention 108+ that Peter already presented, and other frameworks globally, such as the Global CBPR framework, the Malabo Convention, Asian framework, Ibero-American, and the EU-US data protection framework. So in this, in practice, you can see how these regulations in the next slide have been mapped against each other and the criteria in order to find the common ground, but also to ensure the still high standard of data protection. Now, when you compare your interprivacy to Europrivacy, you will actually see that the criteria are very closely aligned, as they are using the same methodology, the same level of requirements, meaning also the same level of protection, nothing less than that, and almost identical criteria with some crucial changes in order to make it geographically neutral. Now, why am I going through all of this information is precisely because this is where I would like to focus on what I am seeing as the main development in the upcoming years. So the main vision and the main ideas that I see coming in the next years is precisely certification assuming a more central role for ensuring, demonstrating, and communicating compliance, but also for promoting safe data flows, which is something that also Peter highlighted, that this is a very crucial point, enabling data flows in a way that makes sense without reducing the protection framework. Now, this is exactly the role that initially the GDPR was reserving for certification to be used as a more at a larger scale and not as something incidental. Now, in this regard, increased international cooperation is also something that I anticipate to see a lot more in order for the various data protection authorities across the world to find the commonalities and the ways in which we can move forward together, in which we can align with other jurisdictions that are also dedicated to ensuring data protection and privacy, while facilitating data flows without compromising citizens' data subjects protection. And it is in this regard where this precise element that is also enshrined in interprivacy, meaning interoperability, is very, very crucial, because these mechanisms already exist, and I think it's highly unlikely that we will see one common model across the entire world, but we can see those frameworks that can help each other work in tandem without creating conflicts. And this is precisely the main point that I would like to highlight, that for the next decades, this is the idea, this is what I see coming. And with that, I think I can give the floor to Paul, maybe.
Thank you very much, Vasiliki. I think you highlighted an important element, but also already we can anticipate some connections with the panel discussion after regarding Convention 108+. But indeed, without any further ado, I would like to give the floor to Paul. The role of the impact of the GDPR had quite a number of ripple effects. The perception of data protection has evolved, and probably the role and the job description, let's say, of the DPO is not the same today as 10 years ago when the GDPR entered into force, and is probably likely to evolve in the next decade. So what would you say? What is your perspective based on your long experience, your close connection with thousands of DPOs across Europe and beyond Europe? How do you see the evolution? What are the main factors of changes that we can anticipate in the years to come?
Okay, thank you, Sebastian, and thank you to everyone that's dialed in today. So I'm going to try and take my crystal ball and sort of predict where the DPO role may evolve to in the next, say, 5 to 10 years. I think, interestingly, though, I think it's worth acknowledging already the success, very quickly, the success of the GDPR to date. I think, it obviously, when it came into force, it was of a concern to a lot of organizations and controllers as to the requirements that had to be met. But I think that with time, the law has certainly embedded itself well into organizations. From DPIAs to vendor oversight and breach notifications, these are now very much mainstream practices within organizations. And I think boards have increasingly accepted the role of data protection and DPOs within their organizations to the benefit of the organization and to obviously to data subjects as well. So the role has certainly professionalized across Europe in the last years. And I think that's reflected in a lot of cross-functional cooperation between legal, security, compliance functions within organizations. Having said that, we are now entering a far more complex regulatory environment in Europe. And I think everyone is very familiar with the EU digital regime and strategy, which is now taking center place with respect to the European economy and the digital economy in particular. And so what I'm starting to see now within organizations is that a number of DPOs are evolving in their role more from a sort of an EU data law GDPR compliance perspective to a greater digital trust and governance leadership role as well. And I think the reason for this is twofold. I think obviously, if we look at the complexity of the EU digital regime and strategy in place, we're talking about the advent of the AI Act, the Data Act, the NIS, European Data Spaces, the DSA, the DMA. There is a lot of new, let's say, data-oriented or data-centric regulations that have come into play alongside the GDPR. Obviously, the GDPR remains a very fundamental pillar of the EU digital regime. But having said that, there are a number of interplays with sister regulations, if I can call it that, which I think is pulling the DPO into fields that are somewhat unfamiliar to the DPO. And I think, from the controller perspective, if you look at the controller perspective with respect to data management at large within the organization, there is definitely a complexity that is very much at the forethinking of boards and of C-suites. And typically within an organization, particularly over the last 5 or so years, the one function within an organization which has had the most exposure to, let's say, data regulatory oversight has been the DPO. And so I think there has been a natural tendency to pull DPOs into the whole conversation around how to deploy AI within organizations. And I think that will continue to increase in the coming decades, in the coming 5 to 10 years. So that role, I think the role in that sense will move more closer to executive decision-making influence and enterprise risk management. I think those are key areas where data protection officers will predominantly evolve towards. So let's say, from what was perhaps seen more from a sort of oversight and documentation of GDPR practice within organizations, the DPO role is suddenly going to enter more into a risk governance and accountability sort of functionality within organizations. And when I say DPOs, I don't mean a named DPO per se. I think if you look at the job description of DPOs on average, it's very unlikely that role is fulfilled by one particular person within an organization, because it's quite an all-encompassing job description if you look at Articles 37, 38, and 39 of the GDPR. So with that in mind, I think we're DPOs were primarily privacy advisors. I think the future for them will be sort of migrating into roles where, on top of their privacy and data protection advisory, they will be looking at more of a strategic sort of role, a sort of strategic challenge, and trusted executive voice within organizations. And I think that's something that we can certainly expect. So perhaps more real-time governance and assurance with respect to how data is managed within organizations. And I think that will certainly drive a lot of the decision-making within organizations, which is becoming more predominant in decisions within organizations. So I think from that perspective, we will see a lot more involvement with DPOs sitting closer to senior management, maybe doing more in the areas of product design with product design teams. A lot of cybersecurity is very important. Obviously, data privacy and data security are sort of interdependent. You can't really have one without the other. And I think you'll see a lot more involvement also in procurement and AI governance as well. When I talk to a lot of DPOs now, there is certainly that move towards AI governance, and I think that's fairly manifest predominantly in technology or organizations and companies. We're certainly seeing that not only in US companies, but we're seeing it in companies like Bolt in Estonia and other such companies. So I think we can certainly see that sort of evolution to more AI governance and digital governance. And I think it could well be that the role of the DPO even changes its name and function. So we could see DPOs maybe going towards more of data governance type officer roles with AI oversight and responsible innovation and ethics. So I think there's certainly a lot of room for the role of DPOs to evolve to more digital governance type responsibilities. We're certainly seeing within the community, our community, so the CEDPO community, we're seeing this already manifest itself at a number of our member organizations. I'll give a very clear example. Our Spanish member, which was known as APEP in the past, is now APEP-IA. So they have actually changed their entire mission statement, and they've pivoted more towards sort of a data protection and AI governance type activity and representation. And we're starting to see that also in some of our other member organizations in France and Germany and others. And I think CEDPO also, from that perspective, is also starting to address those changes. We've certainly noticed that we're getting a lot more questions on that from individual members. We have set up working groups working specifically in the areas of AI governance and also working with the Data Act, so data sharing, which is also, I think, incredibly important going forward. And so we're starting to prepare our professionals for those greater responsibilities, or let's say broader responsibilities, which I think are going to come within the next 5 to 10 years. If you look at it again from the controller perspective, I think it's very important to note that it's unlikely that a lot of companies will be hiring multiple positions to oversee the entire EU digital strategy. So they're going to try and drive efficiency through their existing resources and existing compliance functions within companies to address that, not only within Europe, but also as they operate internationally. And so I think that's something that we're also seeing, is we're seeing that sort of overlap of teams within organizations, from the sort of the data protection team and DPO functionality with areas such as AI governance. So that's certainly happening already, and I expect that will continue as a trend in the years to come. And I think the flip side to that is also the regulatory environment, which is going to change dramatically. If you let's take the advent of AI. We are going to be looking at a multitude of different organizations and agencies, regulatory agencies, at both the national level, but also at the European Commission side, which I think is going to cause a lot of complexity for organizations and companies. And so I think from that perspective, the DPO will also be, well experienced and in that regard in order to help address those concerns and address how to handle regulatory investigations or regulatory oversights. And so I think that is also going to be a key driver in the evolution of the DPO role as well. So I think with that, I can stop there, Sebastian, and maybe we can take more of that into our panel. Just on a very last note, I think with all of that in mind, I think there's a definite shift from viewing a DPO as a simple compliance function and looking at it more from a value creation function as well within organizations. So business enablement is always going to be the driver for organizations, and I think DPOs can be a big part of that equation. So thank you. I think you're on mute, Sebastian.
Yeah, very interesting. What you mentioned, there is clearly a fundamental transformation of the role of the DPO. You mentioned also something very interesting, that even the name, the label of DPO is something that is likely to change. We will keep the function of DPO in the regulations. So we'll need to have someone who will be a kind of external, semi-external, internal, relatively autonomous, close to the management, expertise to monitor compliance and to address data subjects requests. But at the same time, as you mentioned, there is an integration of data governance in the company. So it means there are, first of all, two very interesting developments. One, that the DPO is not supposed to take decision on the governance of the data. It's supposed to be independent, not to be involved in the decision making. So how do you see these kind of differentiation of the roles between the formal role of DPOs and this governance? And maybe another aspect, that it used to be a specific functions. And what you mentioned seems to indicate that we're moving towards something more strategy, so closer to the board of directors, to the strategy of the company, which is not limited to personnel data. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, I think it's quite clear that there's going to be, for the DPO going forward, there's going to be an emphasis on identifying high-risk processing. I think that's going to be quite key, not only under GDPR, but also under the AI Act and so forth. And I think, one of the big risks there will be with an independent voice, is to be able to strategically challenge some of the decisions that are being taken by the organization. And as a trusted voice, as a trusted executive voice within organizations, you can challenge those risks to data subject rights and consumer rights. But also, it can be anything from, children's rights, the risks associated around AI, so children's data online. I think these are all going to be areas that are going to be extremely important going forward. And I think that also respects, the data subject rights that are enshrined under the GDPR. So I think there's going to be that element of ensuring that while companies are trying to business enable the environment, the regulatory environment, that the risks are well managed, that the risks to data subject rights and to personal data are well managed within organizations. So I think you can still retain that independence, but at the same time provide very good strategic advice to organizations as well.
Which is very interesting, which means that we really will see an evolution of both functions becoming more and more preeminent, becoming more and more global in terms of scope. So not only focus on GDPR per se, but extending probably beyond personal data protection, but still with this duality: on one hand, the effective management, on the other hand, the more impartial, independent oversight of the governance of the data. A little bit, even if it will be different, but in the same manner that in a company you have an accounting department and you have auditors who come from time to time with more independent impartiality to see if everything is well aligned. So a kind of complementarity. And I see we have the great pleasure to welcome Karolina with us. I know you had a busy day, so thank you for finding time to join us. It's a great pleasure to have you with us. If you agree, we were discussing about some of the major changes we foresee. Maybe what I would do before diving into the panel, would you like to maybe share with us a few words about for the next decades? We know there are many discussions, very intense work being developed by the Commission to perhaps do some fine-tuning with the way the GDPR is implemented, or clarifying a certain number of elements with the omnibus discussion negotiation. Would you like perhaps just to share with us already, what is your vision? What do you anticipate to be the main changes in the years to come regarding data protection, compliance and enforcement, based on the current discussion, where you have a very quite closer look at what's being discussed and where it can head to? on what is publicly available, I would say, without breaching the confidential information.
Well, I think that the biggest, thank you very much, Sebastian, thank you for having me, and apologies for joining only a little bit later. Indeed, the omnibus is calling. So what can I say is that I think that looking at the law of ecosystem of data in the European Union, the biggest challenge is and will be consistent application of all the rules provided in various legislative acts, and cooperation in the spirit of what the Court of Justice clarified in the meta judgment, in the spirit of sincere and loyal cooperation between different enforcers. Let's not forget that sometimes the very same conduct will be looked at various regulators, consumer protection authorities, data protection authorities, sometimes Commission as enforcer of the DMA and DSA. So there, I think that this is a very big challenge which the enforcers will need to face. I would like to make very clear that there are currently no ideas of rewriting and reopening the GDPR. The omnibus, which was tabled, is supposed to provide for more legal certainty and simplify the application of certain rules. Here, I think in particular about Article 33 and 35 of the GDPR by providing for harmonized whitelists and data protection impact assessment templates or data breach notifications. But apart of that, this omnibus is also not changing anything concerning, be it the definition of personal data or the way the GDPR is enforced. And I know some of you will tell me, yes, but the Commission and committed our Executive Vice President, Commissioner Virkkunen, committed to the so-called digital fitness check, where this overlaps between different or coherent and application and consistent application of different acts in this from the data acquis, broadly understood, will be checked, this consistency and coherence in the application, and checked to which extent should there be any overlaps. This can be removed, but a part of that, not much more. We will engage also on the instrument of this data protection rules for the European institutions and agencies. There will be some clarifications in this respect, as already announced previously in the communication on the application of the EU DPR. And I think it would be that.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Karolina. So what we can expect is not a change in the obligations, but more trying to find ways to make it more easily enforceable, implementable, and finding ways to, I would say, round a little bit the angles, at least to clarify a certain number of points which were still to be discussed. Maybe just coming back to Paul, I know that from the DPO community, there was also discussion to see that what is important for the DPO is at least to ensure that we minimize the uncertainty. Am I correct to relay this perspective that one of the key expectations is clarity, is making things really
Indeed. I mean, I think, and to Karolina's point, this is not rewriting the GDPR. The only ask, I think, that would come from the data protection community writ large is that there's less legal uncertainty. And I think that's always the end game with the rule of law, is to try and provide as much clarity as possible. And I think that's what has been attempted with the Commission proposal on the GDPR to a large extent. So I think that's very much the case. Yeah.
Yeah, the call for legal certainty is actually the strongest. So there is this simplification for which we are providing. It's mainly concerning clarification from the point of view of addressing this legal uncertainty as far as the interpretation of certain terms is concerned. And by no means this simplification means deregulation, because deregulation is not more legal certainty. And nobody wants to start to think what one or the other notion or term mean, because it would just cause additional discussions and necessity to engage with data protection authorities and so on. So clearly the point of this simplification exercise within the omnibus is not to deregulate, because deregulation is not a legal certainty.
So, for instance, just to take an example, I know there were many discussions for a secondary use of data for research, where we know at national level there are different norms, different standards. Some countries it's rather easy, other countries there's no legal basis. So it seems there may be, for instance, in these areas some development. Is that correct? Or do you foresee any evolution for research to facilitate the lawfulness of secondary use of data for research? In these kind of areas, can we expect some developments, or how do you see the current evolution?
Well, in the digital omnibus, we provided, as far as scientific research is concerned, 3 solutions. First, the definition of scientific research. Second, clarification concerning the application of Article 5.1b, that which is actually already clear, but sometimes there were still questions, although the regulator provided, the legislator provided already in Article 5.1b that further processing for the purpose of scientific research enjoys the presumption of compatibility with the initial purpose. Nevertheless, some authorities also had the view that one would need to apply the test under Article 6.4 GDPR. So we clarified that this is not the case. And in addition, we provided for the possibility to, if it would be a disproportionate effort in the case of further processing for scientific research, to go back to the data subject to inform it, because, for example, there are no longer contact details and so on, then this obligation of transparency and information can be complied with in other ways, and always ensuring that the rights and freedoms of data subjects are being protected. So this is how the digital omnibus supports research community.
No, that's really very interesting. To connect with what we were discussing before, we had Peter presenting the likely upcoming adoption and entry into force of the Convention Written 8+. We are missing only 4 ratification. How do you see the connection, and maybe I will give you the floor first, Karolina, and then Peter, what can be the synergies that can be developed between the GDPR enforcement implementation and the multilateral instrument provided by Convention 108+, for instance, in areas such as international data transfer or adequacy decision? How do you see the potential synergies? And maybe Peter, after, if you can also share maybe from the Council of Europe, where you see opportunities to reinforce collaboration, or why can there be some synergies between the European model, which is very strong, very structured, and this upcoming global framework, multilateral framework, which will be interesting because it will build bridges with different jurisdictions across the world. So maybe Karolina, from your perspective, how do you see
more uniformed rules, easier cooperation, and I underline here that, of course, this Convention 108+ is fully or the GDPR is fully aligned with this convention, and this clarification which are provided for in the omnibus do not change that. The more unified rules, the easier the cooperation and uniform application and enforcement of the rules, then also beyond the EU, EEA countries, and then indeed within this forum of Convention 108 plus countries, which go sometimes beyond even European countries, as we know.
Yeah, very good. Peter, on your side, how do you see this convergence or syntony or synergies between the multilateral instrument and the European framework?
Yes, this is an excellent question. Hello, Karolina. It's a pleasure to see you. Well, I will not reveal any secret. The Council of Europe and the European Union, and ultimately the European Commission, are working very closely and have been working very closely in the past, is working very closely to align our policies, actions, everything we can. And I'm very hopeful that it will continue in the future. I'm also not revealing either any secret, because it has been also made public that the Commission had the intention in the past, and based on the very extensive negotiations that we have been carrying out for 7 years for Convention 108, to reach the synergies that Karolina also referred to, which was a very high and strong political will and agreement at that time, that the Commission would, once 108 plus enters into force, propose to the European Union to consider exceeding Convention 108 plus. And for that matter, we have been already in the convention some formula how we could cooperate together and integrate into our very traditional convention, Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaty type of working, the whole European Union mechanism on data transfers, on enforcement mechanisms, and so on and so forth. But of course, not everything is settled, and the 108 plus is not yet entered into force. So there is also a great deal of work together. But I'm very confident that based on the past agreements, expressing of wills, and the actual very good and close cooperation, we will find the ways how to ensure a very smooth transition, which will be beneficial for all European Union, Council of Europe member states, and more broadly internationally, as we always thought that we believe that this is a very solid base that other countries could consider increasingly to join and to exceed, and therefore ensuring that we have a platform where we can decide together on the best ways to go forward on data transfers, on rights. But I already mentioned some of the elements that will be binding as of the entry into force of 108 plus on the parties. That is clear. So we also have to prepare for that internally.
Oh, very good, very interesting. Allow me then to ask Vasiliki, from your perspective. So you mentioned the work which has been done from the European Research Program, first to address the certification mechanism under GDPR. Then we have Interprivacy, which is aligned also with Convention 108 plus. But more generally, the fact that now the EDPB has opened the possibility to use certification as a mechanism for international data transfer, for certifying companies located outside of Europe. How do you see the impact, maybe to you, Vasiliki, and then to you, Paul, of certification to simplify international data transfer, to provide a level of reliability, of accountability, which is not based on commitments, but based on effective control of compliance? So, Vasiliki, how do you see if you are still here. Yes, how do you see this evolution? And again, long-term strategy. I know that everything takes time, but if we try to project ourselves for the next decade, what will be the major changes in this field?
Well, that is a very, very good question. And indeed, since I did cover certification, and this is something that is now new in the field of international data transfers, this is where we do anticipate a lot of simplifications, but at the same time, increasing the level of protection for data subjects whose data is being transferred across borders. Because the idea behind certification and exactly what makes it unique in this approach is the fact that it has all of the requirements that need to be there pursuant to the GDPR. And it had this additional level of a third party coming to perform this assessment of compliance. So it is not a subjective internal negotiation, perhaps, and it is not a one-time, let's say, compliance exercise, as it may be the case with other instruments, but it is a continuous compliance assessment framework that is being conducted by a third-party objective auditor, and regardless of the location. So the idea behind it is precisely to facilitate data transfers, because in practice, what the new opinion brings into force is the fact that a data importer that is located in another jurisdiction can now be certified and receive data from multiple data exporters as long as the conditions are met with just this one certification. So you don't have to go through the process of establishing different tools to enable this data flows. But at the same time, every data exporter that can use this data importer that is located outside the EU also knows and feels more certain in the fact that, okay, there has been a full assessment of all the requirements and they have been found perfectly fine in order to accept data. So they feel more secure in making the choice as well. And I think this is the main difference now moving forward, because this tool has a lot of potential, which up until now has not been fully explored. So this is the main thing that I am anticipating and what I think we will be seeing a lot more of.
On your side, Paul, from the DPO perspective, this new mechanism, will it have an impact? Is it something that can reduce the uncertainty as under the perspective of Article 28, or do you see that it will be just yet something anecdotal or peripheral? How do you see the impact for the years?
No, I think these types of certifications, to everything that Vasiliki was saying earlier on today as well, I think this would be welcomed by DPOs for international data transfers. As you know, we have a number of instruments in existence. Obviously, one of the biggest challenges we have at the moment is obviously with the USA. We have the EU-US data privacy framework, and obviously they're not signed up to the Convention 108, which would obviously make a big splash, I think, if they did. But I think anything that can facilitate from an objective perspective, as Vasiliki was saying, there would be an auditor that would do an independent assessment. Anything that can really sort of reduce that legal uncertainty in terms of data transfers, ensuring that the necessary rights follow the data, then I think that's always going to be welcomed by DPOs for sure. But obviously we need to, I think a lot of great work has been done on the Convention 108, and it can serve as a bridge across different normative frameworks to help have more of a global standard. I think a number of these initiatives are going to facilitate, obviously, different tools such as certification as well. So I think that's definitely welcome from the data protection community.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. More generally, we're reaching to the end of the webinar, but I was thinking also, Karolina, maybe on your side, EDPB approved this declaration, Helsinki Declaration, to engage more actively with the different stakeholders. We see that the Commission is also actively engaging. Can we expect maybe that, I know that for the last 10 years, there was a lot to clarify, a lot of intense work to set in place a mechanism, procedures to clarify a certain number of interpretation of the GDPR. Can we see maybe in the next decade more, I would say, systemic cooperation between the Commission, the regulators, the DPO community, the different stakeholders, where we can see moving from a period of clarification, of implementation of the regulation to a period of organic cooperation, synergies, or dialogue, or how to say it, a kind of more systemic approach to data protection. Do you see any evolution or trend for the years to come that could change a little bit the dynamic or make the dynamic evolve?
I'm not sure I understand the question, because to the extent you are asking about the cooperation between the Commission and data protection authorities as far as the enforcement of data protection rule is concerned, my answer would be that the Commission is not the enforcer of data protection rules. So much as we participate in the meetings of European Data Protection Board, it's an independent body which regroups independent data protection authorities. So this would be that. To the extent you ask about this consistent application of the data, a key data ecosystem in the European Union, and I'm thinking here about different instruments beyond the GDPR, like, for example, as mentioned before, Data Act, Digital Governance Act is being now revamped, and there will be something else, but the Digital Markets Act, Digital Services Act, and other pieces of legislation where data aspects are concerned, and the cooperation and consistent application of these instruments, then yes, I mentioned, I think it's a very big challenge, but we hope very much that it will be developed further.
Thank you very much. May I invite you, maybe each one of you, to share maybe a last closing remark, maybe 1 minute for you. What would be your wishes for the next decade? If there is something we should focus on, what would be your priority focus? Maybe starting from Peter, from the Convention 108+ or Council of Europe. What according to you should be a key focus for the next decade?
Well, 10 years is a long time, of course, and I hope it will not last that long. But certainly my first priority is to have Convention 108+ entered into force and put every mechanism in place and ensure a smooth transition and allow to grow this global community.
Yeah. Vasiliki, on your side?
I would focus a bit more on the hope, that the hope is that we will continue to build bridges instead of creating more gap between us. Because when we do sit down at the same table and have the discussions, we realize that we have a lot more in common than we initially thought.
Building bridges. Karolina, on your side, if you had one wish for the next decade, not engaging your authority personally, as an expert, as a professional who is working in this field, what would be your first wish or the priority wish for the 10 years to come?
Consistent risk-based approach, risk-based enforcement of the data protection rules.
Oh, really nice. Paul?
It's a little bit of everything from what everyone else has said, but just to add to that, I would like to see a greater working between DPO representatives and the local DPAs, so DPAs at the national level, to Karolina's point, for greater consistency, greater consistent interpretation of the law, which I think was to the benefit of organizations and consumers alike.
So we could, if I try to summarize the 4 wishes, it's about building bridges, working together, uniting forces for data protection. So really converging and having a collaborative approach for that. Is it a good summary, a good conclusion?
It works.
Okay.
Yeah, well, risk-based, I would still add risk-based.
And risk-based. Thank you very much. So again, thank you very much to all of you. It was a great pleasure, great honor to welcome you to this webinar. Again, we wanted to think a little bit out of the box to be more prospective. I think we saw there were 4 fundamental changes that we discussed, probably more to come. but a clear alignment in terms of willingness to work together and to make certification, not certification, but data protection in general, regulatory compliance, risk management more consistent, more enforceable, easier to implement globally. So great pleasure. Thank you very much. And I wish you a very good evening. And again, thank you for joining us for this webinar.